The question is, are we too late to Bitcoin? And then I'm gonna ask Opti the same question. I don't think I've heard his answer on that.
Yeah, well, I think to add to Opti's point, and I love what you were doing with showing the Bitcoin price chart in both log and linear scale, because I think that's the exact point. And and sometimes when I show that to people, they say, "Oh, that's cheating. You can't do that. That's not fair, or whatever." And my counter argument to that would be that it's just how reality works in like every facet of science, every facet of physics and chemistry. Reality is in exponential terms. Our understanding of reality is in linear terms, but reality is in exponential terms. We are here, a human's like 2 meters tall or so, but if you look down and you zoom in and farther and farther and farther down to molecules and cells and Planck lengths and quarks, that just tiny things, there are so many orders of magnitude smaller below us. And likewise, if you look outwards to the sky, if you look, to space, there are so many orders of magnitude out beyond us. We're ironically kind of in the middle here between, the tiniest thing that we can conceptualize and the whole observable universe. We're like more or less in the middle. And it's the same thing. If you want to map out the total size of galaxies, or the total mass or the total mass of black holes, you have to talk in logarithmic terms. Because if you map them on linear terms, it's like, well, the largest one just dwarfs everything else. So it doesn't become useful. No visualization is useful on a linear scale if you want to map anything in space or you map anything in a microscopic world. And it's the same thing here with Bitcoin. It's the same thing with value. It's the same thing with technology, that we have to think in logarithmic terms. So I think that's one of the most important things for people to see with their own eyes, that if you look at it in a linear chart, it's always going to look like it's a bubble and then it's dead, and it's a bubble and it's dead, bubble and dead forever. And this goes to your question, which I'll get to in just a moment. But then if you look at it on a logarithmic scale, you see, oh, okay, this is following a hyperbolic adoption curve, as all technologies do. It's just for the first time, we are pricing a technology in a given number. It's like when people first invented the light bulb, or mass producing the light bulb, it's like there was no fixed number that all the light bulbs in the world was equated to, that you can then check 24/7 on your smart device in your hand all the time at 3 a.m. as you worry about if you lost all your money. that we've never had that before. It's all conceptual. It's never been something tangible like that we can see. But with Bitcoin, because of the nature of the technology, that's just how it is, that there is a fixed number, there is a given number that we're pricing them all within. And because we see that, we assume it has to be linear like everything else in our life we see, when in reality it's exponential like everything has been before it. So I think that's really important for people to understand, that this is true in all of nature. But then when it comes to your question of, are we too late? Well, if what I just said is correct, then absolutely not. We're not too late. And I think the most, frankly, painfully obvious example of that is, like, how many people do you know in your everyday life that talk about Bitcoin, think about Bitcoin, understand anything about Bitcoin? How many people walking down the street can tell you what the difficulty adjustment is? How many can tell you the difference between proof of work and proof of stake? How many know the name Hal Finney? It's like people don't know. And if we assume that this technology becomes adopted, well then, okay, 99, 99.5, 99.3, whatever percent of the world is yet to adopt it. And so put aside Bitcoin price, put aside price history, put aside halving cycles, put aside everything else. Just that alone should tell you that it's stupendously early. I was in Fenway Park recently in Boston with two other Bitcoiners, and for like an hour we were debating in this arena, like 30,000 people or so, how many of them actually own Bitcoin with their own keys or own self-custody, like a non-negligible amount, like $100 worth of Bitcoin or so. And, we were like debating, like, okay, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 3. And it's like, no matter what, we just kept laughing ourselves silly, because it's like in this whole, it's one thing to look at a number, 30,000 people, and see a bunch of zeros, like you were bringing up Opti. It's one thing to see the zeros. That's another to sit there with the park and actually see the people and be like, wow, there's like at least 29,950 people here that don't know anything about Bitcoin. and if you continue Bitcoin's adoption curve over the next 30 years, it's like they're probably all going to eventually learn about it. So, and anyway, yeah, no, I don't think it's too late. And I think one more point I'd like to say there, and I think this will be really interesting to people when thinking about exponentials and wealth and everything like that, would be that if we just look at today, and we were to say that the poorest people in the world, on average, say, have about $10,000 USD of net assets. So maybe they're in the developing world, they have not the best housing situation. Maybe they have a scooter or some other form of transportation, much less privileged than we are here in the West. Let's say there's a couple billion people that have $10,000 of assets in total if they liquidated everything. And then let's also assume that on the other far end of the spectrum, the very far left end of the bell curve, not in intelligence, but in wealth, we're talking about someone with $1 trillion. And I know some people may not think there are trillionaires out there, but I think most of us know that it's a high probability there's at least one trillionaire out there in the world. Elon Musk is the public most wealthy person in the world, but that's just because he's public. But anyway, if we assume that's a spectrum, it's like someone with $100 million US is like in the middle between those two extremes. And so it's like, if you want to look at someone that has like food insecurity, is just getting by, maybe making $3 US a day, between that level of wealth versus someone with $100 million US is like the same disparity in wealth between that person and the wealthiest person in the world. Or again, to use a Fenway Park or a stadium metaphor, it's like, let's say we take the assumptions and the estimates to be correct, and there's roughly 50 to 80,000 100 million millionaires. Like if we assume there are 50 to 80,000 people out there with a net worth of $100 million or more, basically if you took all those wealthy, stupidly rich and wealthy people, put them in a single stadium, there is just as much wealth inequality within the stadium as there is between the bottom tier of the stadium and everyone else in the world. And so all that to say is that, is it too late for Bitcoin? It's like, well, it's easy for our brains to think we're too late because we look at Michael Saylor, we look at people that bought in 2013 or 2012 or 2011 or 2017 or 2019, and we think that, oh, we're too late because they have 10, 100, 1,000 times more sats than we do, or so much more Bitcoin than we do. There's no way it could ever possibly catch up. And there's no way. And my metaphor with the stadium there is to emphasize on that point that it's like, yes, you will never have as much Bitcoin as Michael Saylor. He'll probably have somewhere between 10,000 and 1,000,000 times more Bitcoin than you ever will. And, maybe it's even more dramatic than that. But it's like, if you're buying today, probably you'll have thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of times more Bitcoin than the average person will in the future. And that's
yeah, no, and it's I'm fascinated by this conversation. And like Luke, when we talked, that was the thing that literally stuck with me. It's like the exponentials, man. This is where it all boils down to this. But why are you so sure? Why are you so sure about Bitcoin? Why, like, what you're talking in absolute? And again, the only reason I'm giving you pushback is Opti. I know Opti and I feel the exact same way. It is absolute to us, right?
We ask ourselves this question every single day. Like, are we crazy or are we just right?
Opti and I talk a lot. For anyone that doesn't know, we are constantly talking. I think that's the only way that we do what we do. But Luke, I don't know. We don't talk as much. I mean, I think we might in the future. If you know, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. Why are you so sure? Why are you so sure?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. A lot of people think that I'm lost my mind because I am speaking such absolutes, and they're such bold claims. It's like, it's so bold, it's so ridiculous, and I'm speaking with such conviction. It's like who is it? I mean, it's like, okay, what do I know? I'm a 24-year-old, just what do I? But the reason I speak with such absolutes is because I've just thrown every ounce of my thought at this, and I'm not saying that I'm any smarter or less smart than anyone else. It's just that I've thrown my brain at it, and I can't find a way at which this isn't the most probable outcome. Perhaps it's not the outcome that occurs. Perhaps there's a 51% chance I'm right and 100 different scenarios in which it doesn't, but I think it's more probable than not that this is the case. And
Why?
why? Yeah, why do I think that? Well, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is just a piece of information. And history shows that information is really difficult to destroy. The Bible has survived. I was just in Israel last December, and I visited Qumran and the Dead Sea, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, all that. And it's amazing that basically a bunch of goat herders and people from the ancient world were able to meticulously preserve the Hebrew scriptures that now is the Bible, for thousands of years with their primitive ancient technology. And it's like, well, with Bitcoin, it's a similar idea in that it's just information. It's just, lines of code. And as long as somebody somewhere is keeping that code alive and, has their computers plugged in, mining it, running their nodes, all that, keeping the network alive, it's like, that's incredibly difficult to kill. And so, yes, it's possible that Bitcoin does not gain mass adoption. But Bitcoin is just an idea. Bitcoin is just information. And number one, I think it's a very safe assumption to assume that if enough people care about the information will survive. And number two, that the best idea wins, like every time. The internet was a better idea than newspapers because the internet has, again, talking about exponentials, hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of millions of times of more applications and connections than newspapers ever could. And it's the same thing with every other paradigm in history. Locomotives were a better idea than horses. Horses were great. Horses were the pinnacle of technology for thousands of years until suddenly we found a way to manifest the idea of transporting massive amounts of people, massive amounts of resources across space via the locomotive, and the best idea won out. And so why am I so absolute in Bitcoin? It's like, well, assuming that information survives and assuming it's the best idea, then it should just take over everything. And I'm very confident it's going to survive. I'm most confident it's going to survive. And I'm pretty confident that it's the best idea. I mean, what's the other answer, guys? Like silver?
Central bank digital currencies.
Central bank digital currencies? Like what? Shiba? I mean, gold is the best idea besides Bitcoin, and it's a really good idea. I'll give the gold bugs their credit. Gold has worked for thousands of years, and it's a really good idea. But why has gold not been transacted with for hundreds of years? It's like, well, we just can't do it anymore. You can't have an analog, metal keep up with the velocity of money we need in the modern world. Transactions are so small, so instantaneous, and they're so numerous that it just seems like an inferior idea to Bitcoin. And that's not saying it's a bad idea. It just seems that Bitcoin's a better idea. And so anyway, given those two assumptions, I don't see any other outcome unless there's a better idea coming along. But it's been 14 years. No one's had a better idea. And I don't even know where to begin to think about a better idea. I don't know how you get better than perfect scarcity.